Hello there, and welcome to the Empire of the Suns podcast. My name is Kellan Olson, joined as always by Kevin Zimmerman. I feel awkward.
This is a visual podcast.
I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. I'm already turning red. I'm already embarrassed by cameras being here. I don't like this. This is the way of the world, though, and we will adapt. We will change. We've been here for 6 years without these dumb things. Like, I don't know.
We've done it just fine.
People are going to learn how awkward and fidgety I am with the levels and just making sure everything's not shutting off because this very pristine studio always maintains everything and
We're
everything
just trashing
nothing
Jeremy.
ever changes.
Sorry, Jeremy.
Hey, the Suns schedule came out, buddy. Should we talk about that?
Yeah.
We haven't podcasted for a couple of weeks. We're going to do basically what we've been doing basically is waiting for Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell trades to happen so we can finally sort of say, this is the Western Conference, this is the NBA, and do our off-season recap.
So we've done
kind of
absolutely nothing.
And then click eject for this quote-unquote season or whatever. But we've taken like these two sort of mini breaks, and we're going to take a third one after next week, because next week we're going to officially say, okay, whatever, there's no trade. And then if there is a trade worth talking about, like if Donovan Mitchell gets dealt to a Western Conference team, or if Kevin Durant gets dealt to a Western Conference team. Kevin Durant trade in general, I think will come back. But until then, we won't come back until Media Day, probably the week of Media Day, which is the last week of September. So we got a couple of housekeeping items to get to. I was thinking of the term the whole time, and now that I started to talk about it, I kept calling it cleanup for whatever. It's housekeeping. That's the phrase. We got two-way guys to talk about. We got Monty's contract extension to talk about. We got something else we probably forgot to talk about that we're going to forget to talk about. We got the schedule, though, so we should talk about that. What do you think of the schedule? That's a horrible setup,
dude.
So the schedule is out. You can read into the schedule however you would like. It is not something, in my opinion, worth reading a ton into. But with that being said, you can pick out little certain trends here and there. That's what I did on ArizonaSports.com. You can go read it. I'm going to basically talk about what I wrote about. Do both, maybe. Listen to it while reading it. That would be weird, but I would dig it, I guess. It would help us out a little bit. What do you think of the schedule?
Front beginning 6, 7, 8 games. Great competition against West teams. We're going to find out things quickly, but then again, if they started slow like they have a few times, maybe it's not. But it's going to set things up quickly for panic and that sort of thing, so we'll be right back into it. But honestly, like you look at like what schedule makers want and need in their lives, I think there's only one schedule maker. His life.
No, it's got to be like a panel of people. That's too much for one man to deal with.
One.
Really?
Anyway, he probably gets help. I'm sure he gets help.
Yeah, has to.
Go read it. I read it somewhere. You can Google search me and fact check me. Anyway.
See what I'm doing with the microphone? Like the people watching are like, what is he doing? Like the mic's perfectly fine where it was, and I'm already just kind of
not sure we're the best for visual podcasts. Anyway,
I
think one notable was Brooklyn's in the back half of the schedule. There's one in January, one in February, and I believe
Luke noted it as 4 days after DeAndre Ayton can be traded, and then one of them is like right after the trade deadline. It'll be January 9th, yeah. I think is what Bobby Marks said.
Okay.
Ooh.
So they obviously didn't want to burn all the Brooklyn games early. Gotta let that narrative heat up once again in case it goes cold. But yeah, that's kind of my takeaways. I don't really get into the back-to-backs or miles traveled. I don't care. It's probably a grind for the team with the best schedule. But yeah, I mean, I think when we just look ahead to this year, it's top of the West. A lot of fun teams.
Yeah, I've talked about the travel thing a couple of times, especially in the last 2 years, because when you do cover the team just about every day, not traveling with them, of course, Dwayne Rankin is the only person that does that for the Suns right now, and it's just know how much work that is for anyone. I know it's a dream job, but at the same time, Dwayne is leaving Miami at 2 a.m. to fly to New Orleans and then getting 3 hours of sleep before a shoot around or something, and then going and
not the good
the
leaving Miami
or
at
landing
2 a.m.
2 hours before a game starts or something like that. It's crazy work that they do. So I've been able to get a perspective a little bit more on just how daunting traveling can be. So to me, the one big takeaway that I had a couple of different ones, but if there's a big one, it's that they have 12 of their first 19 at home, and the 7 that are away from them, only 4 of those games are on a real road trip. It's a real road trip. It takes them from Phoenix all the way to Philly, and then they go to Minnesota. So then that's the other thing is like you just read like Philadelphia, Minnesota, Orlando. But if you think about it, like you actually zoom out and like look at a map and you go like, okay, they're going all the way to Philly, and they go up here to Minnesota, and then they go all the way down to Florida, and then they like that's a lot. That's a lot of travel. So they're dealing with that in early November. But besides that, their first road trip of the game, quote unquote, is 2 days. It's 4 days. They go up to Portland, have a day off, go down to LA, then they come back to Phoenix, and then they just have a 1-game trip in Utah after that 4-game road trip. So they're going to get a ton of time at home, and you guys might think I'm going like sleeping in your own bed, all that kind of stuff. Like obviously that helps, but just getting practices in their own facility, I really noticed specifically in like the last year or two, because of the way the schedule was so compact, they really, Monty especially, just really valued getting one practice like during the season. It would be like a 3-week stretch, and he would be like, this is the first time we've practiced since 3 weeks ago. And they're going to have plenty of time to practice in there. There aren't really any sort of jammed in dates. And what I mean by that is there's only 2 back-to-backs, and both of them are at home. Those road trips do not include any of the back-to-backs, and they're against Portland twice and then Detroit and Utah. So you're not really getting slammed by great opposition over that stretch. In terms of just intrigue and being fascinated by it and like circling dates or whatever, I just circle the start because 5 of their first 7 games are against premium Western Conference competition. I don't think this is entirely likely. I'm probably being mean to a team like Denver, for example, but I could very well see it being Phoenix, Dallas, the Clippers, the Warriors, the Pelicans, and the Timberwolves as the 6 automatic berths in the Western Conference. I wouldn't pick that, to be clear, but that could be something that unfolds, and we could see the Suns play those other 5 teams. Of course, they start the year with Dallas. They play at LA. Then they play at home against the Warriors and the Pelicans. They get one against Houston, but then they play against Minnesota. So 5 of those first 7 are against teams that I have questions about, and I really want to see. Sometimes I watch preseason games just to see, like, okay, how are they using Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert? Like, I just want to see how it looks offensively. And then I'll watch another game and be like, I'm just going to watch them on defense now the whole time. Like, really pay attention to them defensively. This is how much of a nutcase I am, of course. Warriors, their offseason kind of spoke to, we're ready for at least one of Kuminga or Moody or Wiseman to be ready to contribute right now in a way beyond what they did last year, which was filling gaps here and there when guys were injured, step up for 6 weeks here and they're like, no, for an entire year. And then the playoffs, you're going to be a contributor, at least one of those guys. New Orleans speaks for itself with Zion. I think every Suns fan has a lot of stock in the Pelicans. Like if you really watched that game closely, so for people like us as just observers too, took in a ton of Pelicans stock and like really bought high for them in the future. We're going to get to see how it looks with Zion, assumingly, fingers crossed. Like I love watching Zion Williamson play basketball. We don't know yet. We'll see. The Clippers, I think that we'll get to this more next week when we review off seasons and look at who the biggest winners are. I think John Wall is one of the most underrated players of the 2010s, that decade. Now, Kevin, it was only like 3 years where he was awesome because he's dealt with injuries. He had to kind of get started in his career in the last like 4 or 5 years specifically for him have been brutal. But he was just one of the best playmakers in basketball. And we talk about all the time, Kevin, for this team specifically, ever since 5 years ago, the value of having guys on the ball that can make a couple dribbles and make something happen. They've got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. You don't need much more after that. But then you add John Wall, who, again, from a passing perspective, I think people are going to watch him and be really surprised and remember quickly Optimus Time, which I called the best nickname in the league. I still stand by that. Okay, they've said, Tyronn Lue said to Clutch Points, I believe. He said it's an open competition between Reggie and John Wall. So that speaks already to how highly they think of John Wall already, because Reggie Jackson is really darn good. And then Dallas, that's an easy one again. How does it look without Jalen Brunson, but how do things change with a role man like Christian Wood? I think you and I and just basketball fans in general, we're always talking about guys like Rashawn Holmes and just like how would Luka look with like a dynamic dive man? That's Christian Wood.
No offense, Dwight. Well, he means offense.
No offense to Dwight Powell, but you can take offense to that certainly. But Christian Wood is dynamic in that role. And then he's got a lot more to his game beyond that. I got a lot of heat for tweeting in a certain way about that acquisition, but I think that like defensively, there's something to be salvaged there. Again, with patterns from Suns teams 5-6 years ago, I'm not willing to completely sell on a player defensively just because they were terrible defensively on terrible defensive teams. And we'll see how he looks there. But those are like basketball angles within 5 of the first 7 where I'm kind of, and look, Houston and Portland, it's like Portland, okay, like Dame and the other guys, do they have 5 or 6 other guys? If they have 6 other guys, they can make a little bit of noise. Houston, more young talent. You want to see how Jabari Smith looks. You want to see if Jalen Green, like, is he just going to be an all-star in his second year? He could be. The NBA's fun. I really enjoy it.
You got going, man. I think when we take it back to the front 10 or so games, it'll be interesting to see how the Suns handle that, because all those teams, like you mentioned, have these like very new but important pieces coming back, and the Suns might just make them look bad where it's not going to be absolutely telling of how those teams eventually fit those guys in. So that's an asterisk, but an advantage for the Suns. Like, you want to get good teams out of the way if those good teams are trying to jam in a completely new important piece, I guess is one way to say it. And all those teams kind of are doing that, and none of them are very clean. Like the Rudy Karl Anthony Towns thing you mentioned is obvious. How does Cat he's gonna have to change his role completely, I think.
Is he just gonna take like 10 threes a game?
John Wall, I think, will slot in pretty quick, honestly.
Yes,
because that team's just gonna bomb away and he doesn't need to shoot. He's just gonna drive and kick. He's the best drive and kick guy. I don't know, is Westbrook maybe up there with him, but just because of his athleticism. But yeah, then you go into those other teams and there's just a lot of question marks. So I think they're going to be in a good place where you want to play those teams early.
It's a good way of thinking about it too, where continuity helps them out. Everyone's favorite.
Yeah,
word,
everyone
continuity.
was mad. Everyone's like, Suns didn't go get KD, but also, hey, remember, continuity is important. That's why we're here talking about the team. And
it's such a like, hey, that's a good thing kind of thing, and then you just don't talk about it ever again, but everyone's being so extremely either positive about it or extremely negative about it, which basketball opinions like that, what? I would never. The other thing that I should mention before we get off the schedule is the last 2 years with how the schedule got compacted and there were shorter off seasons, but also just it was a lot of taxing little stretches where it's like 15 games in this many days. Like, how does that make sense? The Suns were excellent when they were able to play a schedule where it was essentially game, day off, game, day off, game, day off, game. And like sometimes there were back-to-backs in there, but avoiding stretches where they had 2 days off without a game or 3 days off without a game. They seemed to thrive on that. I like a psychopath, I went through and found those stretches from last year, and I believe it was 39-7 when I combined the 4 biggest stretches. Of course, you guys will remember the 18-game winning streak. They won 14 straight in that winning streak where they didn't have more than 2 days off in a row consecutively. And they have one of those stretches again, I believe it is from late November through the new year, so to the start of 2023. It's 15 games, and a couple of the guys, I remember JaVale said something, I think Mikal did, and then, which is not surprising for Mikal, who plays a million minutes. Did they just like kind of prefer that rhythm? Now, would they, prefer is the wrong word, they like that rhythm. Would they like to have 3 days off every now and then? Yes, of course, for their bodies.
Especially this team, where they are going, I think they need to take that a little more seriously. But yeah.
And that's one element we didn't really talk about. So anyway, keep an eye on that. So that's late November. So we're talking about how you're saying, yeah, they play really good teams right away. People might panic if they're 3-4, 2-5, or whatever. I don't think that's really going to happen. Then they got that tough 4-game road trip. But then after that, there's like that late November stretch. So look, if we see something where these guys are 10-6 or whatever, or 8-8 again, I think that opportunity in like late November through the new year will really help them. That's something I didn't mention and we didn't talk about in any of the writing, is looking at opportunities to rest guys. Like that Portland back-to-back, for example, that's only 10 games into the year, but is that a time where you will sit Chris Paul? We'll talk about it more next week, but they didn't necessarily make any moves to address that yet, which we will get to next week and save that fun for next week. There's a really tough the toughest stretch is 13 games from late December to like mid-January. They play Memphis 3 times. They play Denver twice. They play Cleveland twice. There's also a game against Toronto in there, Miami, Golden State. I think the Knicks are going to be kind of okay. I was willing to include them outside of the Wizards group, which is like, this is a bad team in the middle of the stretch. 10 of those are on the road. That's their biggest stretch of road games for the year. So those are kind of little, just kind of spotlight these, and we will bring up these points again, like throughout the year. Like when we're 4 or 5 games in, we'll be like, remember when we talked about it? Remember when we talked about it? We're going to be able to reference it. This isn't just useless nonsense we're yammering about. You got anything else on the schedule? Anything else jump out to you?
I'm over it. I'm excited. I know when I'm working, I guess. Congrats to you. You know when you're working. Congrats to your Christmas Day.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. I wish it was. Is the Cardinals game here?
I believe so.
Jeremy, video man,
Thank you
video
for being
extraordinaire,
here.
Jeremy,
Yeah.
Twitter nemesis, Jeremy, is nodding along. So the Cardinals are home. Suns are away. Suns are in Denver.
Yes, that sounds right. Yeah.
Oh, I wish I was.
It is
going.
in Denver. Yeah.
That stinks, man. And it's like an hour and a half apart, right? Because last year you were able to essentially, I believe, go
you could
to
drive
the
across
Suns
town.
game,
Yeah.
and then you were able to go to the Cardinals game. They're like an hour and a half separated now, so that doesn't really make sense. Who do the Cardinals play again? Cowboys? The Buccaneers. God, having a third person, Jeremy should just be like
Just be our
our
fact
version of
checker
Tony.
here.
Yeah, Tony Reale, the stat boy, old school PTI.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we would need Jeremy. We would find a better name for you than Stat Boy, too. That's far too demeaning for a man of Jeremy's talents.